policy of January 3rd, minutes as the designee of the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate the recognition. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of my special order.
Without objection. So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise tonight to honor and to lead a special order, but to honor a great American, a great colleague, and a great legislator whose service to this country and to this institution have been unmatched. It is appropriate that we rise tonight, particularly in light of the action that was taken and has been discussed today on the Voting Rights Act. Mr. Speaker, let me observe tangentially that the gentleman from Texas said something about cramming down somebody's throat, the Voting Rights Act. I will remind my colleagues that it was passed 388 to 23 in this House and 98-0 in the Senate in 2006. Let me say we honor a man tonight who not only voted for the Voting Rights Act in 1965, but has voted for every reauthorization of that act since that time. John Dingell came to Congress as a member in 1955, winning a special election to fill the seat held by his father, John Dingell Sr., who himself served from 1933 to 1955. John Dingell and his father have represented the people of southeastern Michigan in this House for 8 decades. What an extraordinary testimony to the faith of their voters in the constancy and loyalty of their representation. But very frankly, ladies and gentlemen, John's story in Congress actually began earlier than 1955. It really began in 1938, which is to say, John Dingell, a year before I was born. And I'm one of the older members. He came here as a young house page. Now, we don't have pages anymore, but nearly all of us remember seeing the pages. Wide-eyed, sitting along the desk up front, sitting in the back, listening to speeches and watching floor proceedings as they waited to carry messages. That was John Dingell 3/4 of a century ago. The House of Representatives has been part of his life, and he has been part of it for 75 years. On December 8th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, 15-year-old John Dingell was in this chamber as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt stood at the rostrum and asked Congress to declare war against Japan, whose forces had just attacked Pearl Harbor on that day to which he referred as a day in infamy. President Roosevelt spoke these timeless words, and I quote, "With the unbounded determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph." Throughout his time in this House, as a page, as a son of a congressman, as a member himself, as a committee chairman, and as a leader on issues of national importance, John Dingell has taught us who have served with him that America's triumph is only inevitable if we bring to bear the unbounded determination of which President Roosevelt spoke. In John Dingell's record 57 years and 188 days as a member of Congress, he has approached our greatest challenges with his own unrivaled determination. In every Congress, For over half a century, he continued his father's work of introducing legislation to expand health care coverage to all Americans, even in the many years when no one thought it possible to do so. But John Dingell stuck with it. He stuck with it and eventually had the opportunity to help shape and vote for the Affordable Care Act, which will extend to millions and millions of Americans access to affordable, quality health care. Millions of Americans owe John Dingell a debt of gratitude for his faithfulness in the advocacy of their best interest. John, in fact, was presiding over this House when it enacted Medicare in 1965. I told you he voted for the Voting Rights Act in 1965, but he presided over the adoption of Medicare. And he helped write the Endangered Species Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the 1990 Clean Air Act, among many historic pieces of legislation that he has authored, fought for, and seen adopted. But John has done more in this chamber than shepherd key legislation to passage. He has been an unwavering voice for the working families and small business owners, not just of southeastern Michigan, but of all America. He has been a giant in promoting and preserving the great American automobile industry and the millions of jobs that rely on it. He has been a mentor and a friend to me and so many current and former members of the House. My colleagues, John Dingell is a living link to an era when bipartisan compromise was a practiced reality, not just a slogan, not just something we say we're going to do, but something that was actually done. Members looked to John Dingell for his quick wit, his tenacious spirit, his extraordinary knowledge of legislation and of the history of this House, and yes, his warm heart. John loves this House and has always worked to preserve its collegiality and its good order. His unrivaled skill as a legislator is matched by his sense of decency, his integrity, and his devotion to country. And he has never lost that determination that was sparked as FDR called our nation to arms and to service. John Dingell took up arms. He served in the United States Army from 1944 to 1946 as a second lieutenant who prepared to take part in the first wave of a planned invasion of Japan. Fortunately, that invasion did not occur, but John Dingell, as always, was ready, willing, and able. John Dingell, my colleagues, as all of you know, has served America and its people for most of his life. But it is not the length of his service that we honor alone. It is, even more importantly, the quality of his service, the depth of his commitment, and the strength of his character that we honor tonight, and John Dingell that we honor always. We are all better representatives because of his example. I congratulate my friend on 75 years in the House of Representatives, 57 of them as a member. John Dingell has, with diligence, faithfulness, extraordinary skill and judgment, courage and fidelity to God and country, lived up to President Roosevelt's words. He has served with unbounded determination, and he has led a triumphant life. What an example for us all. A triumphant life not because he won every fight, but because he never gave up. He never was unfaithful to his oath of office. He was never unfaithful to his pledge to support working men and women, and yes, everybody in this country. My colleague John Dingell today is much like Tennyson's Ulysses, who said, "We are not now that strength which in olden days moved heaven and earth. That which we are we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. John Dingell. He pledged to his people, when first elected, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And he has indeed done all of those. He has kept the faith, and we expect him to be keeping the faith for years to come. For that is the spirit of my friend, my colleague, a great legislator, a great American, John Dingell of Michigan. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to yield to Mr. Barrow the remaining balance of my time.
Okay, under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow, is recognized for the remainder of the hour as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor my friend, Representative John Dingell, who this month became the longest-serving member of Congress in our nation's history. Representative Dingell has taught literally thousands of members of Congress how to do good things for the people we represent, a legacy he continues to build in his 30th term in the People's House. I've had the honor to serve with Mr. Dingell on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. As we all know, oftentimes our schedules don't allow us to stick around for an entire committee meeting, but I always make it a point to stay until Mr. Dingell is finished. He is such a skilled cross-examiner that by the time he's finished, we've heard the only questions that are worth asking, and we've got the only answers we're ever likely to get. John Dingell's ability to reach across the aisle and find compromise is the cure for what ails this place, and I only hope that thousands more will get the opportunity to learn from the master. I congratulate Mr. Dingell on this historic milestone and for his over 57 years of service to our country. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Without objection.
You want it?
Well,
Right after Jean Grey.
Mr. Dingell, there are many aspects of life that I could comment on. For example, friendship. Our families have known each other, well over 75 years, going back to the relationship between your father and some of my relatives. It's been a long time. And I could talk about the friendship between yourself and your wife Debbie and our family for part of that time. I could also talk about your accomplishments, and there have been so many. I remember when I first came how we worked to clean up the Rouge River. And without your efforts, I think today it would be more like it was than it now is. We could talk about health care and your historical role. We could talk about broader issues of clean water and clean air. We could talk about your devotion to the auto industry of this country and what would have happened all these years except for your dedication. And there are more accomplishments that I could talk about. But instead, let me just say a few words about what struck me as you spoke a few weeks ago, was it? As we were celebrating your tenure. And you spoke at some length. The rumor is that Debbie a few times said, cut it a bit shorter. But you went on. And the reason I think you did is what I want to speak about. You began to talk about your years here, not in terms of the number of years, but what you have seen about this institution. And I think all of us who were there were glad that you continued to talk, because you've been here 55 years as a member, and you've seen the changes. You've seen how there was a greater sense of working together in this place. You saw and were a key part of sure differences, and with you sometimes sharp questioning. But there was a greater feel of common purpose in this unparalleled institution. And you spoke how we have lost some of it. So that's really what I wanted to focus on. Because if anybody can speak about the need for all of us who work here and all of us who are members here, if there's anybody who can remind us of how the importance of this institution should determine how we relate to each other, it's John Dingell. And I must confess, as I listened to your words, I felt that there had been something lost, and that you reminded us it was vital that we regain. And it was interesting, you didn't really want to talk about anything else except your love for Debbie and this institution. So you, in a sense, are Mr. Institution. And your belief in it, your belief in our need to remind ourselves as to how we must try to work together, how we must try to relate, how we must try to take our basic principles, and you really have them, but to use them not as a wall, but as an opportunity to proceed. So we owe you a lot. Your constituents owe you a lot, though you'll deny it. But all of us, I think, owe you immensely for the years you have served here, for your dedication, for your honesty, but for your reminding people in this institution why it was founded. In that sense, I think you are the exemplar of what sparked this creation in its first place. Keep going. Keep reminding. And I hope we'll begin to follow better than we have. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I am pleased to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise tonight to honor a man that I'm proud to call a good friend and a mentor, John Dingell. Recently, John became the longest-serving member of the Congress, serving for 57 years, 5 months, and 26 days, surpassing the service record of the late Senator Robert C. Byrd. John has a storied career in the House of Representatives, and you'll hear a lot about that tonight and already have. He has served with 11 presidents, congressional icons like Speaker Sam Rayburn from Texas, and had the opportunity to vote on landmark legislation like the 1964 Civil Rights Act. He is the ultimate legislator for both Michigan and for America. He's also played an integral part in groundbreaking legislation like the creation of the Medicare program, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the Clean Air Act, just to name a few. I always think of him as chairman, though. Since 1996, I've been fortunate to serve on the House Energy and Commerce Committee with John as our committee leader for much of that time. While most associate John's leadership on the committee with his tenacious government watchdog activities, I saw a leader that did not fall victim to partisan politics that defined the current House, but instead epitomized what we are here to do, the people's business. He's a true legislator. He's truly been an honor to serve with him and learn from him, and most importantly, to call him friend. He has a partner in his wonderful wife, Deborah, and a friend who, like my wife, Helen, allows us to serve our respective districts. I look forward to continuing our work together, John, and our friendship. And thank you, Ms. Speaker, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I am pleased to recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia for holding this special order. It is truly right and fitting that we honor this legislative giant, this man who represents everything that this institution is all about. I have served with Mr. Dingell for 37 years on the Energy and Commerce Committee. And it has been an honor every day. Now I want to tell you two stories about Mr. Dingell. One of them a few years ago, when the Energy and Commerce Committee were made a part of a conference committee on something that was going to create something called Farmer Mac, which was a new security that was going to be issued. And Mr. Dingell and I, we were not happy that Freddie Mac had been exempted and Fannie Mac had been exempted from Securities and Exchange Commission jurisdiction. We were not happy. And so I arrived a little bit late to this conference, which was an Agriculture Committee conference with the Senate. And I arrived, and I sat next to Mr. Dingell. I was at the time the chairman of the Security Subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and Mr. Dingell had been doing all the negotiating. And he turned to me about a half an hour into the conference, and he just wrote out a note and passed it over to me. And I read the note, and Mr. Dingell got up and left the room. And so I continued to negotiate on Mr. Dingell's behalf and the Commerce Committee's behalf. And at the end of the day, we won everything that we were looking for. And Farmer Mac securities were going to be regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. It wasn't going to be like Freddie Mac. It wasn't going to be like Fannie Mac. And so at the end of the conference, I just took the piece of paper, I crumbled it up, and I threw it into the waste paper basket, and I walked out of the conference room. And so it was about an hour later, we're out here on the House floor, and Kika de la Gaza, who was the chairman of the Agriculture Committee, he came over to me, and he had the piece of paper that was crumbled, and he had actually gone into the waste paper basket to see what was on the note that Mr. Dingell had passed to me. And here is what the note said, as Kika de la Gaza is reading it to me. It said, "Mr. Markey, we have just won the first 2 out of 3 issues with the Agriculture Committee. Do not give an inch to them on the 3rd issue." And we did not. And Chairman De La Garza, he looked at me and he said, "You Commerce Committee guys, you're not like the other people here in the House." And that was John Dingell. It was an important issue. It was ensuring that the Securities Exchange Commission would, in fact, monitor these securities. And by the way, would we not have been better off all along than allowing these agencies to escape the scrutiny, which they deserved? And so that then brings me to the second little story, which is that the 7 most feared words ever uttered in Congress are words uttered by John Dingell as a witness is sitting at the table, waiting for questioning. And those 7 words are, those feared words are, "I am just a poor Polish lawyer." Because that is the beginning of a very bad day for a witness, as Mr. Dingell asks for explanations on detailed questions without any mercy showed to an unprepared witness. And so for me, it's an honor to be here to honor John Dingell, who is still at the top of his game, still able to perform those same types of cross-examinations of witnesses as they tremble, knowing that this legislative giant is about to cross-examine. And so I thank him for his service. I thank the wonderful Debbie for giving him to us for his service here. And I thank him for the honor of being able to serve on that committee for 37 years with a legislative legend who will go down in history. And all I can tell you is one of the first things he wants you to know when you got on that committee was that there was a map of the entire world, the globe, over his head. And he just wanted us to know as we got on the committee that that was the jurisdiction of the committee, the entire planet. And that is how he acted as that giant over all those years. It was an honor to have served with you. I yield back to balance my time.
The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has agreed to ESCON Res 19, providing for a conditional adjournment of or recess of the Senate and an adjournment of the House of Representatives, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
The gentleman from Georgia may resume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the gentleman from Massachusetts and congratulate him on the beatification he's received by the voters of his state as he's about to join the other body, and wish him every success in the Senate. To which I can add that the next most feared 7 words uttered to any witness before Mr. Dingell is, "Please answer the question, yes or no." At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the gentleman from the great state of Georgia. It's an honor to lend my voice to that of several of my colleagues as we pay tribute to Representative John Dingell from the great state of Michigan. I am only in my 3rd term in the House of Representatives, so I can't profess to have known John Dingell for that great a time compared to most of my colleagues who have known this great gentleman for quite some time. But as anyone serving in this House soon learns, it doesn't take very much time to know John Dingell, to assess the greatness of this individual, one who carries himself with great humility, which I believe is his hallmark of representation. His identity with common folk, our many conversations about the richness of the Polish culture and the embarking upon the American dream of immigrants of that persuasion and of all persuasions who have tethered that dream for the betterment and empowerment of their individual and family opportunities is, I think, what drives this individual. His motivation to be a public servant is obvious. It's documented, well documented by his years of service, his many years of service, 57 in this House, and dating back to 1938 as a page in this House. His service to this nation through the military, all of that driven, I believe, by the great deep-rooted sense of opportunity that is borne by this nation to many of those immigrants who traveled here and then developed that dream through generations to follow. John Dingell is a person of greatness, a person who is an institutional member of this House, one whose institutional memory with so many issues in this House is called upon time and time again. As a recently appointed member to the Energy and Commerce Committee, I marvel at the sense of involvement that he has had in his recall on the development of so many bills that speak to the protection of our environment, making certain that the air we breathe, the water we drink, the soil that we cultivate is there for us for a better future. That resulted from John Dingell's passion. His involvement in making certain that the auto industry was not only saved but made stronger, great commitment by John Dingell. His incorporation of the many acts of concern and compassion for those who require access and affordability to quality health care, well documented again, driven by the roots established by his dad that enabled him to bang that gavel when we were passing the Affordable Care Act in 2010. So there are many, many stories in just a short time that I learned from this gentleman that empower me. His direction, his instruction, his concern, his guidance, his encouragement, and his praise of any of us, routinely done by this very, very generous man, strengthens us and gives us that motivation to go forward. And what he has always taught us, what he has said to me repeatedly, your word is your honor in this business. I can't help but think what the House would be like if we were filled with John Dingells, where there was respect for your colleagues, where there was drive and passion to make a difference for America's great many working families, where there was a sense of honor and respect for this work, and where there was this attachment to the American dream that ennobles and empowers this arena. He has taught us the nobility, with a small n, of the art and science of politics. He will forever be the measuring stick of quality service and representation. The consummate representative, John Dingell. John, it's an honor to serve with you. I wish you well as you continue to build upon your legacy, and thank you, and Debbie, for being such a well-respected, much-loved couple in this town, our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. God bless you, my friend. With that, I get back.
I thank the gentleman for participating in this evening's special order. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee.
Thank you for yielding, and let me just say that while we are obviously here to give honor and recognize the service of Mr. Dingell, the honor, at least from where I stand, the honor is really all mine to be able to participate in this moment, Mr. Speaker. I grew up in Michigan. I was born in 1958, 3 years after Mr. Dingell began his service in this body. And I grew up in Michigan politics. And if you come from Michigan, and if you're interested in politics or government, you know a lot about John Dingell. His name is really synonymous not only with politics and government, but is synonymous with all the good that comes with service in government. We hear so much these days, of course, about public's opinion of the work that we do and the often cynical nature of public opinion when it comes to government. Well, John really represents all the best in public service and has been a role model for so many people like me who have had a chance to observe him and watch and learn from the great example that he sets. He, after 21 years in this body, was joined by my uncle, who was elected, Dale Kildee, my predecessor, who was elected to serve in the Congress in 1976. And for 36 years, the two served together. So while I knew of Mr. Dingell as an observer of politics as a young man, as he and my uncle served together so closely and so well, I felt like in many ways John became a part, and we became a part of his extended family. And I've often felt that John and Debbie are so close that I can always rely and count on them for counsel and advice and for friendship, that it does feel very much like family. For the whole time during that period that I knew John, I didn't call him John. I always called him Mr. Chairman or Mr. Dingell. And I'll never forget the first day on January 3rd, just 6 months ago, when I was sworn in to Congress, and I came over to shake his hand, and I called him Mr. Chairman, and he said, "No, call me John. We are friends." We represent an amazing and beautiful state, and I always look at John as a role model, as an example of somebody who, in a position of tremendous authority within this institution, understood how to advance the interests of the state of Michigan by balancing the very important need to be a great and protective steward of the natural beauty and the natural assets that makes Michigan such a unique place that we both love so much, but to also be able to keep and breathe life into the great capacity of the workforce, and particularly of our great industry, and particularly the automotive industry, which was born in our state, in which John has been such a careful advocate for and steward on behalf of, and has seen some difficult times and have helped to steer that industry through tough times, and are now seeing it obviously have new life and new vitality. Much of that, a great deal of that, is attributable directly to his perseverance and his willingness to take on a fight and see it through to the very end. There's no other issue more than health care that I think makes it clear the value of perseverance and the perseverance that he has demonstrated for so many years, term in and term out, reintroducing in this body something that his father first brought to the Congress, and that is the basic right of every American citizen to not ever have to go to bed at night worrying about whether their own health, would stand between them and the long-term viability of their own family. And John was here not only to see that battle fought, but actually see it brought to a successful conclusion. So 6 months ago, when I walked onto this floor and realized a dream that I had been contemplating for a very long time, to serve in what I think is still and always will be the greatest democratic body in the history of this planet. It was a great honor to become a member of Congress, but perhaps an even greater honor to be able to call John Dingell a colleague, not just a friend, not just a mentor, not just somebody that I have looked up to, but a person with whom I now serve. I was elected to succeed my own uncle. I would like to think that we have some things in common, Mr. Dingell, and one of the things is you were elected to represent your district to succeed your very own father. And I think what you've demonstrated is that you obviously have your first obligation to serve your nation, to serve the interests of the people that you represent, but also to do great service to the legacy of your predecessor. And I can only imagine what your father must think, looking here and now seeing that not only have you taken up the mantle from him, but have served so long, but more importantly, so ably in advancing the goals and the values that he embodied when he came here, and that you were able to see them through to fruition. So thank you so much for allowing me just a few minutes as a freshman with not a lot of old stories about the House, but with great admiration for the man who has been here for so long. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his participation, and I would note that he, like our honoree, exemplifies the truth that is written in Proverbs, "A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver or gold." At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the gentle lady from Maryland, Ms. Edwards.
Much. I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Barrow, for leading this special order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I am just so honored, really, to be here to celebrate and honor somebody I call a friend, John Dingell. And I notice as we're talking here today, and as so many have approached the podiums, that everyone who approaches says, "John Dingell, my friend, my colleague, my mentor, someone I look up to, someone I respect." And I'd just like to say to my good friend from Michigan that I can't really change those words because they echo my own sentiments. I want to share with you, and so many of us have talked about the long legislative legacy of John Dingell. And as I sat here, Mr. Dingell, I thought, well, I too, when you came into Congress, I had not been born yet. It was about 3 years before I entered the world. When you took that courageous vote in support of the Voting Rights Act and civil rights, I was 6 years old. I recall at the time, living here in the Washington metropolitan area, that my father and mother used to bring us to this Capitol almost every Sunday after church. And they'd bring us, we'd run up and down the east front of the Capitol, we'd picnic on the west front of the Capitol. And I'm thinking today how wonderful it is to know that there was someone who was in this institution, who so valued this institution, and who even as a 6-year-old, John Dingell was working to protect my rights. And when I think about that, Mr. Dingell, I think of all of the members who lined up even before we began this special order and talked about the need to work in a bipartisan way to make sure that we create a formula for the Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court would support, that institutes and puts into place the formula for the way that we protect our voting rights in Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And almost to a one, including John Lewis, none of us would be here had you not had the courage to take that vote in 1964. And so it's such an honor to serve with you and to know that while that may have been the battle in 1964, that you are fully prepared to engage in the battle here in 2013. And what an honor that we all have the great privilege of being able to serve with John Dingell. You know, I almost think, and Mr. Kildee mentioned this, but I almost think there's hardly anything that impacts our modern day lives that we can't attribute to the great hard work and public service of John Dingell. The fact that I got up this morning and turned on a faucet and ran a glass of water and was able to drink it and know that it was clean was about John Dingell. That I walked outside today and even on a stuffy day like this, knew that I could breathe air that was okay. We still have work to do, Mr. Dingell, but to know that that clean air and the cleaner we make our air is attributed to John Dingell. I think back to my grandmother who came to live with us at a point as she was aging, and it was actually just prior to the passage of Medicare, and how different families' lives are now because of the protections that they have for health care as they age and become or are disabled. Those things are attributable to the great work, the legislative legacy, and the service of John Dingell. And so here we are today, and when I first came into Congress, I came in a different kind of way. And one day, John Dingell pulled me aside in the cloakroom, and he said, "Come sit down. I want to talk to you. I want to get to know you." And I was frankly afraid of him. I knew his history. I had watched several Energy and Commerce hearings, and I had no idea. And I knew that he was a great friend of my predecessor, a great friend of my predecessor. And so I sat down and I talked to him. And what I gained from John Dingell was the kind of honor and dedication that he has and reverence that he has for this institution. And it is unlike any that we see, and we learn from that. And so we talked and we became friends. And then a funny thing happened. Barack Obama was elected President of the United States, and an inauguration was coming forward. And again, another reminder that John Dingell's 57 years of service are about this amazing legislative work, but it's also about the people of his district, the children, women, men, families of his district. And there was a high school in his district. Actually, I'm not quite sure it was still in his district, but at one time he had represented that high school. And they had gotten the great gift of being able to play in the inaugural parade for President Obama. And somehow or other, things got confused, and they were staying in a hotel that was many, many miles, a couple of hours away from Washington, D.C. And they would have had to get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to get to the staging area on time. And I represent a district just outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland. And John Dingell reached out to me, and he asked, he told me the story, and I said, well, maybe we could figure out something. And so we found a high school out in Prince George's County, Maryland, and a parent-teacher organization and the students, and they welcomed these students from Michigan that they didn't know at all into their high school. They fed them pizza and sodas and everything. And so the students were able to actually get to the inaugural parade on time. And John Dingell and I have been, locked at the hand and the hip ever since. And those students were so grateful to him. And what I saw in this great legislator is that the people of his district really did come first. And he looked out for them. And they knew that he looked out for them. And like I said, I don't know whether he still represented them or not. I suppose over that 57 years, the way lines get drawn, at some point or other, he did and he didn't and he did and he didn't. But whatever, he thought of them as his constituents, and they thought of him as their member of Congress. And I thought that that is the kind of member of Congress that I want to be. And I think there are so many of us who serve in this institution who really do value it and who really listened to the message that John Dingell gave us about the need to work together and to preserve and protect our democracy by working in a kind of way that gives value and service to all of our communities and to this great nation. And so for that, I want to thank John Dingell for being such an important part of this institution, an important part of the way I've learned to become a member of Congress. And I want to say just finally on health care, when I came to the Congress, I had had an experience of not having had health care and getting very sick and going to an emergency room and having a lot of bills that I couldn't pay because I didn't have health insurance. And when we gavelled in that health care bill, the Affordable Care Act, it was John Dingell, sitting as Speaker Pro Tem, who gavelled in the Affordable Care Act with the gavel that he used for Medicare. And then during the course of that debate, I helped to gavel in the debate on health care. And there was one moment that John Dingell was speaking on the floor about his father's experience and about his experience working on health care. And I was sitting in as Speaker Pro Tem. And Mr. Dingell, I will never forget that picture because for me it was what we do as legislators, but it also felt very personal. And it felt so wonderful to know that in your service, you never stopped, not a single day of the 57 years, to make sure that millions of Americans like me could have health care that was quality and that it was affordable and that it was accessible. And so I thank you so much for your service, and I am so honored to serve with you. And with that, I yield.
I thank the gentlelady, and at this time I'm pleased to recognize the gentlelady from New Hampshire, Ms. Shea Porter.
Thank you very much. And I would like to add my voice to the others here speaking about this wonderful man, John Dingell, who I'm sure right now is quite embarrassed as we talk about him because he has a great deal of humility, which is rather unusual here. So he stands out for that. When I first won election in 2006, and I came in early 2007, I knew about John Dingell. I had taught politics and history. I knew his great reputation as a legislator. I knew a lot about him. But what I didn't know about him is what I want to talk about. When I first arrived, you hear a lot of people call him friend because he has a gift for friendship. He uses the word my friend all the time, and you believe him. He really has a gift for friendship. So he said, sit down here, my friend, and I sat and I talked to the great John Dingell. And he asked me about me instead of telling me about him. And I, too, was pretty overwhelmed at the idea that I was going to be this wonderful man's colleague. And he's taught me a lot through the years. But anytime you want a little bit of wisdom, we know you can just go sit with John Dingell. He sits there very quietly, but people come to him. If you just want to have a quiet chat, John Dingell is available. If you want to remind yourself that civility exists here in this chamber, sit next to John Dingell because he's always civil. He's polite, he's intelligent, he's warm, and he cares about the people. Now, he's done a wonderful job representing Michigan, but he's also done a wonderful job representing New Hampshire and every other state in the country. And through his legislation, we are so much better. But through his presence here, we as members of Congress look better too. So I want to thank you, John Dingell, for all that you've done for me and for all of our colleagues and for this country. And I wish you the best of health and many more years serving America. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Speaker, I will close this observance by recalling the words of Thomas Carlyle. He was an advocate of the great man theory of history. And Carlyle wrote that history is but the biography of great men. Well, if that's true, then the legislative history of this country for over half a century has been but the biography of John Dingell. With gratitude for the service, the example, and the friendship of our honoree, and with the greatest of affection for our honoree, I will yield back the balance of our time. It looks like the gentleman would wish to have an opportunity at rebuttal.
I don't know whether to rebut or to agree.
I am pleased to yield to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, our honoree.
I want to begin by thanking Mr. Hoyer, our leader, and our whip, and my dear friend, Mr. Barrow. Thank you. A wonderful, courageous gentleman from Georgia who has to fight very hard to remain here. I'm proud that you're my friend. Thank you. And you, Dan Kildee, you bear a great family name. Your uncle was my dear friend, and I'm satisfied that he is going to be very, very proud of you, and I'm grateful for your friendship. And I want to thank my old friend Gene Green of Texas for his kind words about me. Wonderful man, has a wonderful wife, is concerned with and cares about people. And I want to say how much the remarks of my colleague from Maryland, Donna Edwards, meant to me. Donna, you're a wonderful lady. There's a story about her. I worked awfully hard to see to it that her predecessor was able to stay here, But by golly, she was so good that he never stood a chance in spite of everything I could do to save him. But she has made me proud that she's here, and she's a great lady and full of goodness. And the story she told about the kids was just a story about her goodness, because she saw to it that these wonderful young people had a place to stay here during the president's campaign when they were going, or president's inauguration when they were going to play and march in the parade. And I want to say to my old friend Sandra Levin how grateful I am to him. Our families have been friends and have a history that's interwoven of affection and friendship going back into the 1920s when I was just a glint in my dad's eye. I want to also say to Mr. Markey, our colleague who is going to be leaving us, how much we have cherished his friendship and his valuable service on the Commerce Committee, and how proud I am of his service. He and I have had the opportunity of engaging in some fights over the jurisdiction of the committee when they were trying to raid the Commerce Committee. And we found, guess what? When the fight was over, every time that he and I were involved in it, we had more jurisdiction than we'd had when we went into the fight. And you, my wonderful friend, Carol, Chief Porter, what a wonderful lady you are. And how proud we are that we have a friend like you here, and who cares about people and who works so hard for them. And I'm proud of the words that you did say. And my Polish colleague, Paul Tonko from New York, us Polacks, and I'm very proud to be a Pole, are very, very concerned about loyalty and friendship and about homes. And he certainly exemplifies that and the goodness. I'm proud of the little things I've been able to do while I've been here. And I'm prouder even still more of the people that I've been able to serve and to help. And I'm very grateful for the friendship of the people of Southeast Michigan. The legislature has redistricted me so many times that they can't find a place now that they can put me that I haven't served before. So I have a great deal to be grateful for. My father was a wonderful public servant, and he taught me that we here are public servants. We're not the masters of the people, we're their servants. And this is reason for us to be particularly proud, because that is the highest calling of all. So to you, my colleagues, who have so graciously and kindly made this rather embarrassing evening possible for me, I express to you my thanks and my gratitude for your friendship and for reminding me that there still is the wonderful warmth of friendship and goodness in this institution. The lovely Deborah, my wife, and I thank you for your friendship and kindness, and all the other colleagues who we are serving with now and those whom we've served with before who are no longer with us. We're grateful to them, and we're proud. This is the greatest nation in the world. We're part of the greatest experience and the greatest experiment in the history of mankind, an experiment in government, which gives equality and opportunity to all of us. And we're reminded that serving and saving and protecting those people that we serve and the values that they hold dear is a tremendously important concern, one which we're going to have to go to bat about again to see to it that the Voting Rights Act is extended, because the protection of the rights of our people, and the greatest of all, the right to vote, are not yet fully assured. So to all of my colleagues tonight who've been so gracious and kind to me, I express to you my thanks and gratitude. It's a privilege to serve with you. It's even a greater privilege to have you for friends and to have you be people up to whom I can look for your goodness and decency and concern, and for the service which you so gladly and generously give to the people of the United States and the people that you represent in your different districts. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your patience, and with that I yield back with great gratitude to my dear friend
and from Georgia, and with my thanks to all of my colleagues who have spoken excessively kindly about me tonight.
And with that, Mr. Speaker, we yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back, and it's been an honor. The chair lays before the House a prayer